Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to be chatting about the data playbook, looking at how to capture, use, and protect data. So very much looking forward to this webinar today. The planned agenda is to cover kind of a little bit of info on the data landscape, understanding what data businesses are collecting and what businesses should be collecting, because there is a little bit of a difference sometimes, making sure that you're getting value from your data and making sure you're doing that in a compliant way, obviously. Understanding kind of what to do when things go wrong with data. So we'll run through a couple of examples there, and then also looking at like building a data protection kind of practice and foundation that scales with you and your business as you continue to bring in and gather and use more data. And then finally, we'll run through some questions. We had some pre-submitted questions, but of course, as we're going throughout, please do add questions into the Q&A box and we shall endeavour to cover them as much as possible. But without further ado, to kick off, we'll start off with a few intros. So I will start with a quick intro of me. I'm Lauren. I am an account executive at Trustkeith. So I spend a huge amount of my time on calls with different businesses, kind of understanding how they're approaching data protection and helping them to understand kind of how they should be looking at data protection as well. So very excited to be on this webinar today, hosting it. And I'm joined from the Trustkeith side by Kayleigh. So Kayleigh, I'll hand over to you to do a quick intro.
Hello, yeah, I'm Kayleigh. I am the lead DPO at Trustkeith. I'm really excited about this one today because, like, my background is that I was originally an ops person, and in my heart of hearts, still consider myself to be an ops person. But once upon a time, back in 2018, I'd done a tiny little bit of data protection, but then I joined a brand new organization. They revised the role of their European operations manager, and they knew that GDPR was coming. They didn't know what to do about it, and they said, "Oh, we'll put it with ops," which is the general house for jobs that other people don't want. I am a total weirdo and absolutely loved it, and I've run with it ever since. But fully conscious that that is not the experience of every ops person. I'm excited to have a chat with some ops people today.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kayleigh. And, from the TK perspective, nothing at all weird about loving data protection. We do love data protection here. And we're also joined by Michelle as well. So, Michelle, over to you for a quick intro.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Hoskin. I'm the founder of an organisation called Standards International, which is a global standards body predominantly in financial services. And more recently, I co-founded the Business and Operations Management Network, which effectively is a community for those in business and operations management roles. Extremely passionate, like Kayleigh, about operations. And when we spoke about doing this webinar, I almost forgot how much I do love and how often we should be looking at tracking data. So it's just an absolute no-brainer. So I'm delighted to be here. Been in professional services for 30 years, nearly. It's crazy. And looking forward to it. So yeah, please ask questions, please get involved, and I'm sure we'll be happy to cover as much as we can.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Okay, so to get us started, we're actually going to kick off with a quick poll, just to understand kind of how confident everybody is that's watching is on data protection. So I'll hold on this section for a minute while we get everyone's answers in. Okay, fab. I think that should be the majority of answers in now. Yep, perfect. All right, so the majority of people not very confident. There are a few gaps, which is great. It's great you've joined us today. Hopefully we can help to fill some of those gaps in as well. And for those who are like very confident and fairly confident, hopefully you'll learn some kind of new stuff as well, and kind of understand a little bit more about what Trustkeith and Bombs does as well. So first section that we want to talk about really today is kind of the data landscape that is within scaling businesses. So Michelle, from your perspective, what you're seeing across different operations teams, how does data tend to like accumulate as businesses grow, and why do you think that like visibility on data becomes such a challenge?
Yeah, can I just use the words chaotically? Just that, just to start us off. I think I think just to, kind of to link Kayleigh and I together, I think Kayleigh and I hit it off straight away because we both think like operationally, and I think Kayleigh's right in talking about her own background. You know, operations tends to be the kind of dumping ground for everything. So I think that links into the question, Lauren, actually. I think ultimately, no business sits down ever, I've never seen it in 30 years, and says, I know, over the next 10 years, let us capture A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. They don't. They don't think about planning for their future vision or their strategic plan. So data is almost like the last possible thing that they think about. It's just almost, it appears. And I think there is no business that, like I say, sits down and says, you know, over the next 10 years, we're going to track this data. And if that does happen, it's because the person at the top, the decision maker, is particularly analytical. They understand right from the get-go that data is key, you know, data is king. So I think how does it accumulate? It accumulates in batches, it accumulates randomly, sporadically, it accumulates across multiple systems from spreadsheets to being in CRMs, being in a finance spreadsheet, being in a a survey results, thing. I think it just, accumulates badly and chaotically over time. And I think everybody has their finger on the pulse in terms of their own data, but actually very little do they see any visibility over everyone else's. So I think it accumulates randomly and sporadically. And I think it becomes a challenge because, let's imagine us three were a small team. We know what's going on. We know who's doing what. We know what's happening in finance. We know that, Kayleigh's covering three jobs. We know how Kayleigh feels. We know how the clients are. But as the business grows, we become less visible over the data because everything is so much further. Like there's not enough bandwidth for us to get our arms around all the data we need to know as business leaders. So we either pass that down to somebody else to figure out, but we just lose sight because our eyes can't be everywhere, or our eyes and ears can't be everywhere. So I think visibility becomes difficult when there's so much. It's like data overwhelm for me. And there's just more people kicking around with their own individual spreadsheets and, data areas would be my
Mm.
view.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that, and that's something we touch on a lot with a lot of our customers and prospective customers. It
Yeah.
is confusing what data companies
Yeah.
have, because if you've been running for like 5, 10 years, the type of data you've got has just expanded
Yeah.
throughout that. And Kayleigh, from your perspective, like what are you seeing across our customers where does data governance typically start to like fall down when it comes to that increase in data?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo what you and Michelle have already said, which is that, things do grow organically often
Mhm.
in organizations. You don't usually don't set out with that goal that, we're going to collect this and we're going to collect that. And there is a tendency among a lot of people to just gather as much as you possibly can,
Yes.
like squirrels hoarding for the winter. It's like get as much data as we can because you don't know when it's going to be useful. And oh, if I don't want to get
Yes,
rid of that
us.
because it might be really helpful at some point. We all turn really Gollum-like. I'm like, no, 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 no. And I think that genuinely is a point at which it starts to fall down because yes, having data is really useful. Yes, like data is absolutely the core of a lot of businesses these days. It is essential. You cannot get away from it, but it
Mm.
needs to be good data. And I think a lot of the time when things fall down is that people are just hoarding and hoarding and hoarding or not understanding what they have because, someone else has always done it like that. It lives in that system. No one really knows what's in there. That got inherited from, the last person that used to work there. And that lack of that, that muddying of the water, that lack of transparency, that lack of understanding really creates confusion further down the line. And it's very hard to then understand what data is good data and what data is bad data.
Yeah.
That has a real impact on the way that organization, it has an impact on your compliance for one. There are rules around how long you should be keeping things, but it also, if I put my ops hat on, has like an impact on your operational efficiency. Like rubbish in, rubbish out. Like that's how it works. And particularly with AI systems, if you haven't got good data, garbage in, garbage out, that is the way that it will work. And then there are also some other, impacts that I talk about, like there's an environmental impact to just hoarding lots of data. It's literally bad for the environment to just hoard
Yeah.
lots of data. So, all of those kind of knock-on pieces. But typically, like I find that where these things aren't a focus early on, you can lose visibility and ownership. And people are, by habit, we all just follow the things that we're told to do, right? So you go in, we've always done it that way, so this is how we do it. We've always collected that data, so this is what we collect. And it's very easy to kind of fall into those bad habits that then become real governance issues further down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, and that point actually on garbage in, garbage out, it's and becoming Gollum-like and not wanting to get rid of data. I quite like that. But Michelle, like from your perspective, on the flip side of that, like obviously there is data we don't need, but what from an operations perspective, like what are the data points that actually matter for
Yes.
running a business well?
Yeah, and I just want to add a point to Kayleigh's point. I think one thing Kayleigh's hit the sort of ethical environmental piece well, but I think there's also, if I said to any member of my team, can you go and get me this piece of information? I don't actually think any of us are aware of the administrative burden that that one piece of data can cause, because data creates work. So if you think about it, right? I mean, ultimately, data needs to be found, captured, checked, stored, maintained, protected, reviewed, and then eventually deleted. And that's just by a flippant comment of me as the boss or whoever, or the data department or the line manager saying, "Oh, can you just go and get me the that? Have we got that information? Can you tell me that?" It creates like all these work points, and someone's got to go and do all that work. And AI is going to help hugely, right? But and whilst it's using a gallon of water, right, and burning some forest down the road, but ultimately it creates a ton of work. So I think that's important. I think the way I would break it down. I'm just gonna pull up my notes because I did a bit of a kind of an extensive list, although it was actually quite long. Um, I think ultimately, I think it needs to be in a number of key areas. So first of all, I think it needs to be on the performance of the business. So the sort of the health check of the business. It could be turnaround times. It could be, the projects that we've got going on. How close to our business plan are we? Just the general health of the business, as if the business was a person or a real entity in its own right. And I think a lot of data is missed when it comes to the business, and I call it basically operational intelligence, right? Because what are the things that I need to know about my business? Are we on track? Are we performing? And this is not including finance data. This is just the health of the business. Um, then you've got obviously people, the well-being of my team, sick days, are people doing extra time? Are they working overtime? So I suppose for me, the data at any level is all about indicators. It's almost like intelligence and indicators. It's like, what do I need to know so I can see what's going on in the business? Then you've got team, and then you've got processes. So turnaround time, service level standards, wastage, where, there might be a service failing, there might be something going wrong. One of my favorites, which I flipping love, is tracking if work's being done twice, if one job is being done twice. That is like, and everyone knows when it is. If deadlines are being missed, why are deadlines being missed? So, tracking deadlines. I think you've then got all of the finance data, turnover, revenue per employee, which I can talk about more, revenue per client, lifetime value of clients. So there's all the kind of finance data, that budgets, cash flow, debtors, the whole lot. And then I think you'd look at client feedback rates, the length of time the client is in your client journey, where you've got blockages, where processes are broken down in the client journey. Another one for me is I always have a sort of a thing that I joke around with my clients, but it's actually a very good measure. I'll say, we want to get to a point where your clients never have to phone in for an update on what's going on with their work or project or whatever. Because if you've cracked that, it means all of your stuff is outbound, of which you have complete control over. So I would be tracking inbound calls, inbound queries, complaints, that kind of thing. And it's just intelligence, right? It's just insights and intelligence. And then I think you've got the marketing stuff. You've got branding. If this campaign has done well, what do most people inquire about from a inquiry perspective? How long does it take to sign up a new client? So I mean, we've got sort of five element areas that I would always say, and it's basically those. business plan. So purpose and business plan, team engagement, productivity, operations and tech, and those client journey, client proposition, and then branding, marketing, and so on. So it's almost like I've got 5 headliners that I would always track data in. But it's like your superpower. Data's a superpower. If you've got it, it's your intelligence, it's your indicators, it's everything that a business owner and their leadership team, management team need, would be my say.
Yeah, almost like as well thinking about like a not like a problem statement or something like that.
Yeah,
Thinking about what do you want to know and then tracking it backwards. Okay, well, what do we
yeah,
need to see to be able to actually
yeah,
understand that thing?
yeah. Yeah, and just one point, I say this, I mean, sometimes, as leaders, whether that be you're in a business ops role or you're a business owner, I think ultimately you are looked upon to make some really key decisions on behalf of your business. And sometimes we just don't have the information at our fingertips to make the right decision or to be able to make an informed decision. So data and having that view, like in the Minority Reports where Tom Cruise does that with his fingers, and I think Tony Stark does it in one of the Avengers movies, and it almost puts your dashboards on you in the air. That's kind of how I see it. Like I can't make a decision on for our business if I'm not informed enough. Not it could be dangerous. It's almost like commercial business suicide to do so. And that's any role, business ops, leadership, business owner, whatever.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And Kayleigh, from your perspective, because we're kind of talking about like capturing data now, like what do the rules say about what businesses can and can't capture?
Yeah, so this is actually a pretty interesting one, and this is one of the reasons I like data protection, is because it's actually quite flexible, and you can do things as long as they're reasonable, I think is the key takeaway. And so I really loved what you said there. You said like start from a problem statement, and that's the right thing to do. Like there are a couple of key points, like it needs to be lawful, so you need to have a lawful basis for collecting it. Um, you need to tell people what you're collecting in plain, transparent language. Like you need to be really clear with them what you're collecting, and critically, and this is the important thing, why you are collecting it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can collect data, you can collect personal information. You need to be really clear about the why. Like, why do we need this? What is the purpose of this for our business? And that should always be documented. And I've kind of got an example of that it's maybe a bit of an extreme example, right? But in my previous role, I spent 7 years working for an international NGO. And one of the things that I did was when the Ukraine war broke out, I went out to the Ukraine response as their data protection specialist because it was a really unusual situation. The GDPR applied, blah blah blah. I spent a little bit of time working with the team on looking at some of we were doing a cash assistance program, looking at the questions that were being asked. And we were kind of going through, and some of the questions that were being asked were exactly what you would expect, like basic identifiers. And then there were some other sections that were about, health and questions like, do you have any breastfeeding children within the household? And I dug into it a little bit and I was thinking, okay, well, why are we, why are we asking this question? Are we asking it because it was just on the form that we were using in another context for another donor? Or is there a real reason that we're asking this? In that instance, it actually was necessary because we were providing additional support for particular individuals, and then we were tracking outcomes based on mother's health and infant's health. Those
Yeah.
two things were required. But it's, doing that fine print work. It's actually looking, it's like, what are we asking? Why do we need this? Do we really need it? Can we defend whether or not we need it? And it makes planning super important, right? So if you plan really well, and I think ops people love a bit of planning. So like, if you can plan really well and think, okay, what do I need? And potentially like, what might I need? What's the next step? What are we going to do with it? Be really clear about it. Make sure that you can justify it. If all of those things are in place, and you're avoiding collecting stuff just in case or just because we've already done it. They're the things that you want to avoid. But then like the next part of that is the transparency. Okay, so then are we being transparent with the individuals that are seeking this cash assistance on why we're asking them these questions? Like, are we telling them that we're going to be tracking the outcome and that's why we're asking? We're not just asking because we're nosy or we want to track who's doing what. Like ultimately, data collecting more data means more responsibility, but it's also more risk and more cost. So minimization benefits everyone. It benefits operations, it benefits compliance, it benefits the business. But all businesses, as Michelle said, like data is your superpower. Every business, NGO, like tech startup, multinational, whatever you are, like you need data. It's just about thinking like what data, how can we do it properly?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that data minimization piece is interesting as well because it's almost like as Michelle said, when you ask about a data entry and you ask about a data thing, and then it actually creates this whole stack of tasks that somebody then has to go through and do, and it increases the workload. And actually, where you can minimize some of the data, it minimizes that work and makes you more efficient. It's easier to find the
It
information you're wanting.
For sure, it minimizes the work and it also minimizes the risk. Like the honest truth is, my
Yeah.
data protection hat on, the more personal data you process, the bigger the risk.
Yeah.
If you have a data breach, and let me be clear, like all organizations at some point or another experience a data breach, it's just how serious it is. But if and when you experience a data breach, if you are holding thousands of records that are out of date or that you didn't need to collect in the first place, it's going to be much more serious than if you were holding the minimum amount necessary. So like it also equals it's a superpower, but it is risky.
Let me give you another example, right? So you're talking about, there, Kayleigh, you're specifically talking about, let's use the term consumer data, right? But you think about what we do. So we assess predominantly financial services businesses and professional services business on their processes, their structures, their team structures, their trade secrets, their methodologies. And, part of our process is to gather a lot of that data, right? Till we can review it. Well, what if, our systems got breached? So I think when you're talking about personal data and business data, all of it is needs protecting. I have a massive responsibility if I, take an organization's trade secrets and unique methods and all the stuff that goes behind it. I've got their data, and if I, got hacked or whatever as a business, I've got all of their copies of their documents. And it's a bit like, someone's dashboard gets nabbed by somebody because it's tracked all this amazing data that I've just rattled off. That could be the perfect source of truth for my competitor. So I think less is not better. I think more is not better. Less is potentially in this case better, more accurate. But it gives us what we need, but it doesn't, should it get hacked, if you've not protected it properly, it doesn't give all your trade secrets away. Like, you think about my database of business and ops managers, someone would pay lots and lots and lots and lots of money for that database. Lots, just to market them alone, to market IT equipment and, marketing services. So I think it's all data, business data, personal data, data, all data.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at, I was on a course recently and the guy was talking about, the data that's sold on the dark web,
Oh,
how much
God.
people will pay for it. And health data is, by the way, by far and away the most expensive type of data that's sold on the dark web, and therefore the most valuable to people who can get it. And so if you're working with health data, the risk that you're going to be targeted is really high. But as Michelle, as you're alluding to, it's not just health data that
Yeah.
comes with a cost benefit to people doing harm. Like it's all types of data. And so like as much as you don't want to scaremonger, like I'm not here to frighten people, but like data does equal risk. And if you can practice good data minimization, you are literally minimizing the risk. And that's, and as well as not just minimizing the risk to your business, you're minimizing the risk to data subjects, like, the individuals about whom the data you hold is on. Um, and that's really important. I mean, to me, like my corny little catchphrase is data protection is people protection. Like every single one of those data points is about a person,
Person or
and
or a business,
exactly.
which is a real living live thing. Yeah, gosh.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that catchphrase to you, Kayleigh. I love it. It's my favorite one that I've learned from Kayleigh, and she has a few actually. So if anybody ever wants to hear them, drop her a message on LinkedIn, ask for a data protection catchphrase.
The Kayleigh catchphrase quote book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. On kind of looking at the capturing of data, Michelle, how can businesses, like, so we've talked about,
Mhm.
you need the different reasons why companies would need data and what's important, but how would they actually use that data to drive decisions and maybe spot problems and stay on track?
Yeah, so I think I want to just reframe an important point. So data capture for me and for most, I think is we kind of think down the historic line, the stuff that's already happened, you know, service standards not being met, personal data, but actually the way I physically would want to move my physical body, if I think about it, is I almost want to have it. So rather than looking in at past data, yes, to spot trends, to spot issues, to spot challenges, my favorite thing to do is looking at it and go, where's the opportunity here? What are we missing here? Why is that person buying that? Why can't they buy that as well? You know, the personal information. I mean, if you think about our members, so as a silly example, right? Well, not silly, but an example, we've got members in our community from all over the world. And I could go, oh my God, we've got them in South Africa and we've got there. I'm looking at where we don't have them.
Mm.
Where do our members not exist, for example? So I'm looking and going, well, could we target that area? Why aren't those people in business and operations coming from South Africa or Australia or wherever? So I almost like then kind of jiggle myself inside and think, what can I do with this data for opportunities to grow the business, to, look at, like if you've got somebody that hands their notice in, which we all have had in the past, we've missed the intelligence that could have come from the data we could have captured. That's why things like well-being surveys, yes, they give us intel, but it's like, what more could we be doing? What is this not telling us? Where are our opportunities? So from my, my thing would be using data for future to make decisions, to fuel ideas, to fuel campaigns, to position things differently. And the thing I love, especially with feedback, is when we capture feedback at all. So I'll give you an example. We've just done a well-being survey, a global well-being survey for those in business and operations. Wowzers. I mean, a lot of it was not specific to a person. We people didn't have to put their name and it could be anonymized. But wow, what a survey and what a load of response that we've had telling us what's going on in the workplace, how overwhelmed do they feel as an example. That's all data, right? I'm capturing data. But what that's allowed me to do is sit down with all that information over my dining table on bits of paper, really, and say, what can we be doing for these people? I can't do anything about what's happened to them, but I want to know what we can be doing. So for me, it's about future planning. It's about spotting opportunities. It's about growth, not
Mm.
manipulating, not, abusing that data, but using it for growth for everybody's benefit. That would be my absolute, that's why I would capture any data.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Kayleigh, from your perspective, thinking about that, like using data for decision making, I know that is quite a big topic in data protection, automated decision making, all of that sort of stuff. Like, where do you see with like customers and companies where the like line is, where do businesses trip up with that, like using the data for decision making?
Yeah, so I mean the issue really isn't using the data for decision making. Like using data is very rarely a problem in and of itself. Like the risk is more when an organization starts using specifically, for data protection purposes, specifically personal data for something new without considering whether or not it's appropriate or whether or not it's in line with the reasons that it was first collected. And so, like to give an example would be, let me think of a good one, CCTV. CCTV is a really good example. So you install CCTV in your, let's say, store. You install CCTV to prevent crime, right? To prevent people from stealing your whatever it is that you happen to be selling. But then there's a bit of function creep, mission creep, because managers then start wanting to review the footage to monitor staff clock in time, clock out time, disciplinaries, like performance issues. And then, there's that gradual creep into, well, how has this now just become monitoring? Are we now just monitoring our employees? And that's where there is risk. Okay, so that function creep is definitely where there is risk. And repurposing data, whether it's to make decisions or for something entirely new, you need to kind of think about the original purpose that it was collected for. If it's not in line with that original purpose, and you can do an assessment on that to find out whether it is, then you need to go back and you need to consider, well, is our lawful basis still legitimate, or do we need to give the data subjects more transparency, or is there a less intrusive way that we can do this? Michelle, you've mentioned your wellbeing survey. It's anonymized. That's no longer an
Yeah.
intrusive way of doing
Yeah.
it. You can look at the anonymized data or the aggregated data. Um, so there's a few simple questions that are usually really worthwhile if you're kind of doing this. And it's, why are we using it? Is it necessary? Like, is it necessary is a really good question to ask. Like, do I actually need this? Like, could I do this in another way? To use that CCTV example, like if what I want to do is check that my employees turned up on time, well, then I could just look at the clock in data, or I can ask someone.
Yeah.
I don't need to go and start looking at CCTV footage, which is quite intrusive. So there are other options. Would the person reasonably expect it? You gathered it for this reason. Are they going to reasonably expect that it's being used for that reason? And can you clearly explain it? And if you can answer those positively, then you're good to go. But like, as I say, it's not using the data that's the risk. It's that function creep. As much as, like, at the start of the webinar, we talked about, like, data grows organically. Well, sometimes the uses for capture, sorry, the uses of data that you have captured can grow organically. And that's where there is more of a risk. Like, data grows organically, it can create problems further down the line because you don't know what you've got. But use cases growing organically or without proper thought, that can be where there is risk. So what you
Hmm.
want to make sure is that you're not letting those operational changes, which we all need and are part of what makes business fun, and you do your job, but that can outpace the governance, it can outpace the data protection. So if you've got new tools, new suppliers, new processes, new use cases, you need to make sure that there's someone who is deliberately thinking about it and making those decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
and on
point.
that point, Kayleigh, actually, what would a company say? We'll continue your CCTV example, actually. Like, they start using CCTV to prevent theft and prevent crime, and then the business wants to start using it to check that their employees are working in the way that they should. Thinking about that company, like, what do they need to do from a data protection perspective to be able to do that? Are there certain steps that they have to go through to be able to start to use it in a different way?
Yeah, yeah, there absolutely are. I mean, first of all, you need to be super clear about the purpose. So, what is the specific problem that you are trying to solve? If it is, we have an issue with health and safety. Like, people are injuring themselves on the shop floor because they're, I don't know, buggering about on the trolleys or whatever it is, that's a specific problem that you're trying to solve. Or there are repeated timekeeping issues, or we have concerns that there's fraudulent, or we have justifiable concerns that there's fraudulent behavior with our timekeeping process. Um, so the purpose is really, really clear. A good purpose is not just, I'm not really sure that they're doing what I want them to be doing and I want to have a snoop. That's not a good
Not.
purpose. That then just crosses over into full-on employee monitoring, which is something that I would strongly advise you avoid. But if you've got a clear purpose or a problem that you're trying to solve, go back to that, Lauren, you mentioned it earlier, problem statement, right? And then you're going to think, the next piece to think about is, like, is it necessary and proportionate? And proportionality is so key. We talk about this
Mm.
all the time in Trust Keith, right? But proportionality and data protection is critical. And the question to ask yourself is, like, could I do this through a less intrusive means? You know, like I said earlier, the clock in records, asking someone, just conversations with people. And if the answer to that is no, then you can go and look. You probably want to consider whether a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment, is appropriate in the CCTV instance. Definitely, it would definitely be appropriate. But there are other types of instances where it wouldn't be. I want to make a management decision. I've looked at it, we're clear about the purpose, we're clear that it's necessary and proportionate. It's not processing special category data. It's not doing anything particularly concerning. You probably don't need a DPIA, but you need to answer the question of, should I do one? Like, that first bit, like, does a DPIA need to happen, is always a question that you should answer. And then, like, finally, you just want to update your transparency information. So people need to be told. In that instance, your employees need to be made aware, and that would probably be through the employee privacy notice. or your general organization privacy notice in other instances, or specific policies you would put out, but you definitely need to make people aware of how their data is being used. And then the final piece would just be, data minimization and limiting, like in the specific instance of the CCTV, which actually is quite a good example. Like it's about limiting the use. So you're looking specifically at like the relevant time periods or the relevant camera. You're not just looking at everything all of the time because there might be one thing that's happening.
Can I
Yeah.
add a point, just a couple of bits to that?
Mm.
I mean, a lot of our clients and a lot of our members within the community are from within financial services, and one of the big things we've got at the moment is the consumer duty, sort of the consumer code, where businesses in financial services specifically are really needing to understand and hone in on any consumer vulnerabilities within their existing clients. And, you know, firms, businesses now are capturing and logging and reviewing a great deal of sensitive data, not that would be filled in a form per se, but about their clients' life events and life circumstances. And, I had a client recently, and I was talking to his business manager actually, and one of the clients had just been in the meeting with the advisor, and their son had taken his own life. And it impacts about, on average, between 120 and 140 people when someone takes their own life, right? But that meeting was being recorded. The advisor was so engrossed in the conversation that he forgot to stop recording. Now, that recording is now in Teams. It's stored somewhere. And at this particular point, there wasn't an AI sort of note taker running. Um, but I think, when AI is involved, we've got to really know where that data is going to end up. And I think an additional point for me is I think people need to let people know when and if AI is going to see their data. We had another firm that introduced an AI bot. This was actually before really AI took over, and a very forward-thinking financial services firm. And they had, like, I think they called it B-bot or something, but it had a name, and it was basically a system that sat. And they obviously, we spoke and we said, you need to let every single client know that you've got B-bot on your system. That, well, when you email and say, can you send me this bit of information, they're interrogating your file to give you the information you've asked for. But they're not going to go and find that one piece of information. They're building the whole picture. So for
Mm.
me, it's is a human reviewing this information, or is it? And that's when, standards around AI policies. But in terms of data protection, you've really got to. It's like you've just opened up that person's information to the whole universe and beyond when you introduce AI into the equation as well. So I think we are capturing a lot in meeting recordings now. I mean, I saw the other day there's a little device that you stick to the back of your phone called Pocket AI, and it basically records everything, everything. It just sits there. Like I'm not going to be wanting to chat with my girlfriends about moaning about my husband, and the Pocket AI is sitting on the back of that phone, but she's not going to go, oh, just to let you know, I'm recording this meeting.
I've never heard of that, and that's really horrifying.
Isn't it? Pocket
Absolutely.
AI, it literally, and there's a picture, it's all, they're all very proud that there's this thing stuck on the back of an iPhone, and I'm just like, hell no,
Oh
not in,
no.
not
I
in
mean,
this
Yeah,
world.
AI is a minefield when it comes to things like this.
Of
And
course.
like, a couple of reminders. If you have AI recordings on your calls, you absolutely, absolutely must disclose that that is happening. Um, you just have to. Like, just morally, if for no other
Yeah,
reason. Like,
yeah,
I know I spoke to a customer recently, and they said, "Oh, like they're on all calls everywhere now, so everyone just expects it," and that is a little bit true. We've
yeah,
become very accustomed to them, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be giving people a heads up. In fact, even more so because become so ubiquitous.
mm,
Sometimes you do need to point out. Sometimes it's really obvious, other times it's not. Um,
yeah,
a lot of most organizations that I come across are doing that and are doing
yeah,
it well. But in my view, the gap actually isn't using the AI itself, but it's assuming that because a customer knows that they're being recorded, they then know or expect that the AI is going to analyze them, create summaries, extract kind of vulnerability indicators, Michelle, as
Yeah.
you mentioned, those kinds of things. That's not obvious. And so like making sure that that is disclosed,
Yeah.
it's really key, and you don't need to go through the big spiel on every call, but making sure that it is somewhere clearly indicated that
Yeah.
you are transparent. And the only way you can be transparent is if you first understand how you are using that data yourself.
Absolutely.
Because if it's being used by a team in a way that no one else understands,
Yeah.
there's no way you can be transparent about it, and there's no way that you can control it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Oh no,
Mm.
Pocket AI is now on my new fear
I
list, and
have
on
a look.
Meta glasses.
The other one,
Yeah,
just sorry, Lauren.
glasses.
Sorry, just to say one more, again, just as a financial services reference, but actually a business reference generally. There's a lot of financial services businesses, Kayleigh, that are for sale, and they're selling their client banks, they're selling their businesses to other businesses. And if I'm a financial planner about to sell my business and I've got, 5,000 records of individuals over the last 40 years of me being a financial advisor, at no point in my preparation to sell my business have I asked them if they're okay to send all of my data. Am I okay to send all of their data to a new company? And effectively, people are being, and this could be a whole other webinar, right? People are being paid a lot of money for effectively what is data,
Mhm.
and it's covered up in the, oh, I'm selling my business. No, what
Yeah,
you're selling is you're selling me as your client, and all of my information is actually what a financial services sale transaction is actually about. And I've got this fear that in 10, 15 years, the ambulance chasers are going to be right on that. And they're going to be like, you might be up for a compensation if you're a financial advisor, sold your business 10 years ago, you know, because they're buying
yeah.
data. That's what
It's
they're buying.
definitely a rabbit hole we could go right down. I mean, one piece that I would add to that is just, in the course of that sale, if you're looking at that, and if you are, at the process of doing that, one thing that you should expect, and the organization, the party that's purchasing should be doing, is due diligence. And
Yeah.
so if you're not prepared for questions on how did you get this data, what were the individuals told, what was the consent notice, what's the lawful basis that you're holding it on, you may find that you are struggling to sell your financial
Yeah,
services business,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because the organization doing the purchasing should be doing good due diligence on that data. And so that would be, thinking at it with a business hat on, you're in financial services, you want to make the best, that you want to get the best exit. You need to make sure you're prepared for that due diligence, because it's probably coming.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, true that. Hmm.
And I mean, we've spilled onto the slightly more negative side of data protection, the scary side, which is absolutely fine because it links in with my next question, which is, Kayleigh, what are the legal obligations that companies have to go through when something goes wrong, like a breach or they get a DSAR or whatever it is? Like, what do companies need to be aware of in the context of this data that they're collecting and using?
Yeah, I mean, you need to be aware of the key fundamentals. So, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, data minimization, accuracy, the key principles of the GDPR. And I'm sure by now most people have heard of them, so I'm not gonna harp on them too much. But the beautiful thing about the GDPR is that, like, it would be a lie if I came here and said it gives rights back to data subjects, because that's not what it does. But what it does is it rebalances that relationship between business and individuals, or it seeks to rebalance it a little bit. And it doesn't go all of the way. And there are data protection purists, and I'm probably among them, who wish it would go much further. But ultimately, it does give some rights back to individuals. And so individuals have the right of access. They can ask for copies of their data. That's known as a data subject access. Um, yeah,
Request.
request. That's right, DSAR.
Yeah.
So you can ask for a copy of your data. Organizations need to be prepared for that. It is not good enough, frankly, to get a DSAR and then go, oh, we've never had one before. We don't know how to do it. This looks quite complex. It's been the law for a really long time now. Individuals have had those rights for a really long time. Get prepared. They are happening more and more and more, particularly when employees leave. They are making DSARs. They are becoming, quote unquote, weaponized. Um, Almost every organization is getting them now. And if you haven't had one, well done you, but it probably is coming, I'm afraid. So, be prepared for that. know the other data subject rights. You have the right of the right to be forgotten as it's known, or the right of erasure that applies in certain circumstances where data can be deleted. Individuals also have the right to complain. The right to complain was slightly beefed up ish in the UK recently under the Data Use and Access Act. There's now an obligation on organisations to have a complaints procedure, where I've definitely said, there are a lot of rules around data protection. I would be absolutely lying to you if I said the ICO are going to come around, break your door down, and kick your computers in because you don't have this in place. I was talking to someone recently who described the ICO as a bit of a wet fish, and that's a really nice really nice way of putting it. The ICO probably aren't going to fine you for not doing these things, but what can and will happen is that they impact the reputation of your business. If you get a complaint, and a data protection complaint, or indeed any other kind of complaint, and you just ignore it and you don't do anything with it, you're unlikely to retain that customer, and they're going to go and tell three of their friends. On the other hand, if you deal with a data protection complaint really well, you can actually win trust. You can actually, boost your reputation. So they're on the data subject rights. On data breaches, like certain types of data breach need to be reported to a regulator. All data breaches need to be recorded. And so if you don't have a basic data breach process in place, I'd strongly recommend that you get one. Again, I think I said it earlier, like all businesses, no matter how well protected you are, everyone suffers from data breaches. And it's just how serious they are. Some people get really unlucky and it's really serious. Other people get lucky and it's not. But I was on a security course recently, and the guy said, the best thing to do is to assume compromise. And so, all organizations will get them. Be prepared for it. Know what a data breach looks like. Know what you need to do when it comes in. Like, know when it meets the threshold for reporting to the regulator. None of it needs to be the biggest lift in the world, but a lot of it is about doing what we ops people do really well, which is like being prepared, being on it, having a process for when it goes wrong, and being able to step in and say, it's okay, guys, we've got this. I've got a procedure.
Yeah, love a procedure.
Love it.
Mm.
To add, oh, sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to say, just for everyone listening, sending an email to the wrong person quite often counts as a data breach. So I would say every company that is attendant here has definitely had a data breach at one point. We always hear that from customers and potential customers, that they've never had a data breach, and it's always a red flag when we hear it, because you have. But yeah, Michelle, on to you. And actually, I was going to ask, like, because you obviously live and breathe operations, Kayleigh, I know you've seen this as well, but like the impact on the business can be pretty big, like operationally, when something does go wrong. So it'd be great to kind of like chat through that a little bit.
Yeah, again, I'm going to build on what Kayleigh said. I mean, just as a segue, about 10 years ago, I had a very disgruntled employee who, she was actually a subcontractor. She wasn't even an employee. And she, just because I didn't need this support anymore in the business, we all quite right and happy days, we ended her contract with us, and she absolutely went to town on us. Like, she did us for everything: constructive dismissal, sexual discrimination. And then the nail in the coffin was, oh, and can you send me all of my data? She'd worked with me for 10 years, right? And she did it to cripple us, basically, and also to build her case, because she had no case. It never actually went anywhere in the end, but she tried to cripple us with it. And but what was interesting was the data we held on her, and all of her records also involved, and this question sort of for Kayleigh, it also involved most of our clients. And our clients were not prepared for us to share all of their correspondence and all of their emails with Helen, and her case, basically. So we were, and then in the end, it all got dropped before we even had to issue any of this data. But it's crippling, and it can be done with the wrong intentions, not somebody actually wanting their data. But Kayleigh's right. You need a process anyway. But the impact for us, and even thinking, post that time, what happened? This is a data breach. This is a data request. We almost had to cease all client service, because all of the manpower was on this particular piece of work. I couldn't develop the business. I couldn't grow the business. I was dealing with my team who were pulling all this data together and was fighting this case effectively. So service stopped. The team, if there's a data breach for sure, or there's a tech issue or a hacking or whatever, the systems are turned off. So your team cannot get access to anything because the whole thing's been shut down. It can cost thousands and millions and trillions of pounds, right? Payments are delayed. We had everybody in the team, so that finance function, the business stored. I mean, the list goes on. Yeah, there is the reputational, of course. Significant management time diverted, business development stopped, and normal decision making slowed down because it was all about said thing. Well, there's many things I don't want in my lifetime, but that is one of them. I don't ever want this business to be ceasing anything because it's a catastrophic. It could be a catastrophic impact not only on reputation, but on the impact it'll have on our growth. So, I mean, gosh, it was horrendous. But I think, it's an internal impact, it's an external impact, and you just don't want to go there. You just don't want to go there at all. So, listening to everything Kayleigh's talking about, it's so, so valid, so important. And I just think, these ops people are given this job of being data protection officers like Kayleigh was in her existing job. And it's a minefield. So, when I found out about what Trust Keith was doing, I was like, oh my God, I was on a dog walk. And this woman was talking to me. I'd never met anybody in data protection. I swear to you on my life, I'd never met anybody in data protection. I went on this dog walk. And I was like, oh, just had this call because I was on my headphones. And I said, what? I thought, oh, what do you do? She said, I'm in data protection. I was like, oh, are you? I was like, I've just found out that there are outsourced data protection officers. She's like, yeah, there are. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I think to have a you that a firm, a business can tap into on a consultancy basis, on an I think it's absolutely fabulous, to be quite honest, because lots of people just don't have the bandwidth for it. It's a full-time job, especially in our sector as financial services and in operations. It's a full-time job. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
that would be my thoughts.
certainly can be a full-time job. And as I would always say, the DSARs particularly, they're never going to be pleasant. They're off,
No,
they never are. And I would be like lying if I told you that, come and work with me and I'll make them a song and dance, because they're not. That's not the
they're
truth.
horrible.
But there are things that you can do to be prepared for them, and so that you've got a process when it happens, so that you're not then having to divert all of the effort from somewhere else and shut down everything else that you're doing, so that you can really quickly go to your data register and say, where should this data be held? Okay, they're the systems I need to
Yeah,
search. I know what I'm going to do now. It's still not going to be fun. It's not going to be a walk
yeah,
in the park, but it's going to be it's a process that you can follow, much the same as any other process that you would
yeah.
follow. And that, I think, is really helpful to those, to ops people where it isn't their full-time role. Like,
Mm.
I wouldn't have known from Adam how to run a DSAR on day one of that job when I was suddenly doing
No.
protection. I had to
Mm.
go and find out how to do it and how to build that process, how to do it. That took me a long time because I was doing it from scratch, but effectively by myself.
Mm.
The benefit of having support is that you can come and we can say, look, we've done this thousands of times. Here's what works.
Yeah.
Here's how we recommend that you do it. Like, here's how it goes. And that is also helpful, rather than people having to feel alone and feel like you've got to go and
Yeah.
like find out how to do all of these things from first principles.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree.
Fab. Well, I am conscious of time. I was going to say, what a great conversation and discussion we've been having. Actually, I feel like that's flown by. So, I wanted to just ask both of you to share your key takeaway from this. If people come away from this webinar with one key thing to remember or to think about, what would it be? Michelle, over to you first.
Oh my gosh. I think as an ops person or somebody in management leadership, I almost want you all to create your dials. What is it that's in front of you that you're monitoring, tracking, and using as your intelligence? And I know there's not enough of that going on. My three favorite at the moment, and this spans both business and client. Um, I'm a big one for tracking revenue per employee. And that's basically you take your turnover, divide it by the number of equivalent full-time members of staff you've got as far as data, and it gives you a revenue per employee figure, and that gives you an idea on health check. The other is revenue per client. How much revenue are your clients generating for you, and lifetime value of client. We've got people in professional services are like we're like referrals and we're tracking where business is coming from. You might have one client that's your highest earning client is an individual, but you might have one that doesn't earn you much because of their own contribution to your business, but they've referred you to 60 people, and the lifetime value of that client is them plus the 60 people. So I'm all for thinking and wanting everybody to think about what data would it be really great for me to have at my fingertips that I'd be able to make some really badass decisions about the future of this business. That would be mine.
Nice, thank you. That's really, yeah, really, really good points. And Kayleigh, from you?
I would say that like good data protection and good operations are they come from the same principles. If you can build data protection into your everyday processes from the start, rather than trying to retrofit it after, you've had an incident or you've grown really quickly, then you're going to be onto a winner. And that's what operations is all about. It's about thinking about these things in advance. Regulators are looking for evidence that organizations have thought about risk and made sensible documented decisions. And operations is all about risk. It's what we all do. It's looking at different types of risk, and data protection is just another one of those. Building your data protection, your privacy into your existing business processes as far as possible, thinking about your procurement, your HR, your product development, onboarding, rather than creating lots of different parallel processes, is again just good ops thinking. It's streamlining things and making things really easy for yourself. And then if I could be cheeky and just have like one second point, it would be like know when to just pause and ask questions. Know when it's worth just asking questions about a new technology or a new type of processing or new uses of personal data that, trigger all of the things that we've talked about already. And I think sometimes that knowing when to pause and ask the question is the most valuable skill that you can have in data protection and in operations and in lots of other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And mine would be, I mean, everyone obviously want to hear from an expert in this field. That's why I'm on here. No, I'm joking. But mine would be to break it down into like bite-sized chunks. Like data protection is quite an overwhelming thing. But actually you can break it down into very manageable tasks and processes. And I think that's where we see the most success with our customers as well, when it's broken down into manageable pieces and chunks. So what I'd love to do now is just a quick poll with everyone on what you'd be interested in us doing a session on next. And while that is in place, I will let you know about what our next webinar is on. So it's going to be in August, and it's going to be on building like an AI policy that works for your business. So the idea is that you'll come away with it's very much like a action kind of based webinar. So you should come away with a really good like template of how to actually go away and execute an AI policy, rather than us just talking about like what it should include. It should be quite hands-on, I think, hopefully. So that's the plan. You'll get follow-ups after this, which we'll send the details of that upcoming webinar and also this webinar recording tomorrow. And as always, if anybody has any feedback at all or any questions that they want to ask either Michelle or Kayleigh, please do get in touch with us and we can make sure that we get your questions answered as well. But thank you both, Michelle and Kayleigh, for joining us. So nice chatting with you both today. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Great stuff. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done, Kayleigh. Well done, Lauren.
Thanks. Well done,
See you
Michelle.
later.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.